The next special request is from the Folger Coffee Company, contracts 2017-0466, 2017-0467, 2018-0297, 2018-0298, 2019-0391, and 2019-0392. There's a missing number on the agenda, just
Okay,
to point out, it's 2019-0391.
all right. We have folks here from representing Folgers. Please come to the table.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Jimmy Leonard. I live here in Baton Rouge. I'm with Advantis Consulting. And
Leonard, I'm going to ask you to pull the mic just a little bit closer to you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Again, my name is Jimmy Leonard. I live here in Baton Rouge. I'm with Advantis Consulting, and I sit here before you today because we've been assisting Folgers with their ITEP applications. With me is Chris Dodaro with Folgers Company, and he'll have some words to say here in a second. Before I turn the mic over, I'd just like to make a couple statements for the record. We're back here before you today because of one simple reason. The New Orleans City Council, New Orleans School Board, and the New Orleans Parish Sheriff continue to follow their own ITEP rules, which are not aligned and far exceed the eligibility expectations and rules set out by the Board of Commerce and Industry. As you may recall, a significant amount of time and energy went into creating the BC&I rules on how to implement the governor's executive order. We held multiple meetings, many that went on for hours on end, and this board has done a yeoman's job to get the ITEP rules in a place that we can use today for the practical application of pursuing ITEP exemptions. Soon after these BC&I rules were in place, there were two communities that took additional liberties to pass local ordinances and resolutions, effectively putting local laws and local rules into place that far exceeded the BC&I's rules. East Baton Rouge Parish and Orleans Parish were the taxing authorities that did such. East Baton Rouge Parish, after the Board of Commerce and Industry passed its own resolution informing the local communities that there is only one set of rules and there's only one authority, and that is the Board of Commerce and Industry's rules, and the Board of Commerce and Industry's authority to create rules. East Baton Rouge Parish went back, modified their resolutions so that they could be in line with the Board of Commerce and Industry's resolutions. In an effort, NOLA has simply decided to ignore your wishes and do their own thing. So we sit here today. Every local taxing jurisdiction in the state of Louisiana follows the Board of Commerce and Industry rules, except Orleans. Given my experience supporting companies through their ITEP application approval processes, it has been my expectation that there may be many local authorities who would also like to create additional rules and regulations to govern ITEP, but they have not. Denying Folgers' appeal, thus allowing Folgers to lose their ITEP because of NOLA's illicit rules, will tell every school board, every parish council, every police jury, every city council, and every sheriff in the state that they too can ignore and defy the Board of Commerce and Industry without consequence. My fear is that all the hard work and time that has been done to date to implement the governor's executive order will have been for naught, and we will invite additional uncertainty in this program and its processes. The Louisiana Constitution only provides ITEP authority to the two bodies, Board of Commerce and Industry and the governor, both of which must make tough decisions, as the Constitution states, which are deemed in the best interest of the state. To make this explicitly clear, the BC&I appeal resolution made this explicitly clear, yet NOLA still believes it can have its own sets of rules. Bottom line, if NOLA wants to have the same rights as everybody else, then NOLA needs to follow the same rules as everybody else. Meaning, until NOLA gets in line with BC&I rules and the rest of this state, the Board of Commerce and Industry and the governor should deem any and all NOLA ITEP denials as invalid. Thank you very much. Chris?
Morning. Thank you for the time. My name's Chris Tadaro. I'm the Vice President of Coffee Operations at the J.M. Smucker Company, the parent company for the Folger Coffee Company. I oversee our coffee Coffee's operations, which are consolidated to our 3 locations in New Orleans. I was born and raised in New Orleans. I started my professional career 35 years ago at the Folgers Old Gentilly Road facility. Across these 35 years, I've been directly and indirectly connected to Folger operations, both in New Orleans and at locations across the United States. Through my role, I had a chance to return to the area to offer support following Hurricane Katrina, and I enthusiastically took advantage of the opportunity to relocate back home. Following the tragedy, our company was proactive in supporting the community and our employees, offering many opportunities on temporary housing, extended benefits to those who were displaced. We are proudly one of the first businesses to open up after that event. Within 3 weeks, we were operating in our facility at the Old Gentilly facility. I'm here today to personally solicit your support and assistance with the challenges we've had around our ITEP application to share a bit more about who we are. The story of Folgers brand in New Orleans goes back to 1963, when we first began roasting our coffee in New Orleans. Since that time, we've continued to invest in growing the business, growing our physical footprint in the area, and growing our role in the community. In 2010, we consolidated our entire coffee operation of manufacturing to New Orleans, following an active recruitment by representatives from the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans, including offering incentive programs we have in place today, reinforcing and extending the long-standing relationship between our brand, our company, and the state of Louisiana, the city of New Orleans. Since we've consolidated our operations, we've invested tens of millions of dollars to upgrade and modernize our facility. Additionally, our commitment to New Orleans and investments in our facilities have created hundreds of jobs, helped diversify the local economy, and generated revenue for the community. Today, we have nearly 700 employees at our 3 New Orleans facilities, with a total payroll of more than $62 million during the calendar year 2022. To put that in context, our payroll has increased 140% since we consolidated our coffee manufacturing operations to the city of New Orleans. We continue to prioritize our employees and offer them a work environment that supports their needs. In fact, our efforts have made us one of the most popular employers in the area. This comes to life in many ways, including offering higher wages and benefits as compared to other employees of our scale in the city. Our hourly rate starts at $22 an hour and goes up to $40 per hour with extensive benefits including medical, dental, vision, 401k with employer match, bereavement pay. We've continued to enhance our benefits over the years, including enhancing parental leave and paid time off. Additionally, we have accelerated our inclusion and diversity strategies to support gender and diversity inclusion across our organization. We are proud to be joined today by a few of our employees here in New Orleans who represent the tremendous workforce we have, a workforce that is motivated by the opportunity to have a career and not just a job. The workforce that includes many employees who have been with us for decades and many whose families have been with the company for generations. To those employees with us today and for all those who support our business in this community, I personally thank you. Our focus on securing the best talent is in service of supporting our consumers who trust us as a leader in the at-home coffee category. To put this in greater context, more Americans start their morning at home with a cup of coffee from one of our brands than any other. And with home coffee consumption at its highest level in some time, consumers are relying on trusted coffee brands more than ever. Our dedicated New Orleans employees deliver on that need every single day. In addition to producing Folgers, the team delivers growing Dunkin' At Home and Cafe Bustelo brands. Combined, one of the largest coffee companies in the world is manufactured in the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans. While we are proud of how we continue to support our employees and trust we have earned among our consumers, we're even prouder of the work we do here in the community. In addition to being a leading employer and one of the top local property taxpayers, our incredibly passionate and dedicated employees have played a meaningful role in supporting this area. Here are just a few examples. Following Katrina, Smucker New Orleans team was a leading participant annually in the November to Remember work, coordinated by the Habitat for Humanity. This program was focused on rebuilding homes impacted. Our team aided in the construction of more than 100 homes over the course of several years. In addition, on the day we announced our consolidation, the company contributed $1 million to United Way of Greater New Orleans for the continued recovery and rebuilding efforts. I add this commitment was incremental to a long-standing, multi-year history of our employees in the company giving to the United Way and other nonprofits in the area. Our facility was also active in supporting the community at the outset of the pandemic. Along with enhancing safety measures to ensure the health of our employees, we supported a range of efforts, including providing meals to first responders, keeping us safe, and donating to the Restaurant Worker Relief Fund to aid our neighbors who struggled financially as customers were forced to stay home. In addition to these specific examples, we've consistently offered contributions to local schools, nursing homes, major community events, and other kid and child-related activities to support key occasions. As we continue to donate funding, product, and volunteer time to organizations across the community that address the needs to provide critical support. It's what we do. Please know that we take our role as leaders in the great community very seriously. As you consider these applications, we hope that you can appreciate our passion to continue to build in New Orleans. Our ITEP applications presented a package of capital projects across multiple facilities, all to achieve a simple yet powerful goal: to increase our expansion and production capability, which will result in greater return to the local community. To be clear, we do understand this is a very complex matter, but there are also some misconceptions I would like to take the opportunity to clarify for the committee. There's been some public commentary that we are not paying the taxes we owe, which is not accurate. We have timely paid every property tax invoice issued to date. We've consistently been a top 10 property taxpayer since as far back as 2017. I might add, before we consolidated, we were not in the top 10. For New Orleans' 2021 audited financial statement, we were the 4th largest property taxpayer in New Orleans. So since consolidation, we've gone from not being in the top 10 to within the top 5 and number 4. There's been suggestions that we have not appropriately addressed the process laid out before us. Again, this is not an accurate representation. Throughout this process, we have followed the ITEP procedures as presented to us. Given our confidence in the fact our ITEP applications should be granted, we have simply preserved our appeal rights throughout the process and will continue to do so until a final decision is made. To reiterate, the economic incentives offered through ITEP and presented us by the state of Louisiana were a very important consideration in our decision to consolidate our coffee operations to New Orleans. To this end, all of our ITEP applications in 2010, from 2010 through 2015, were approved without incident. Number 2, all of our ITEP issues are post-executive order applications that do not align with the local eligibility criteria. I will repeat, in 2005, we made a decision to stay in the state of Louisiana and rebuild. In 2010, with your help, we decided to invest and grow, which we have. We are incredibly proud to be a part of the community and appreciative of the support we've received. We look forward to continuing to being a leading member in the area while supporting the needs of our fellow residents, our families, our friends, our employees, as we have for over 60 years. In closing, I'd like to again thank the committee for your time and willingness to hear our appeal today. We believe the facts are straightforward. Based on the contractual details of the cooperative endeavor agreement we signed when we consolidated our coffee operations to New Orleans, we are confident that our ITEP application should be granted. We have not only fulfilled but far exceeded our annual job and payroll obligations under the agreement. Additionally, we have followed the outlined ITEP application process and have no outstanding tax debt or previous filings under review. In summation, we ask that you send our ITEP applications to the governor with a recommendation for approval, given that we have successfully met eligibility criteria. With that, I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. One housekeeping thing, I do have some follow-up questions. What was the contract number that you said was left out? I did not write it down, forgive
It was,
me.
one of the numbers was missing out of the contract number, 2019's 0391. On the agenda, it says 2013 031.
Oh, it was just transposed then.
No, there's just missing a
Oh,
9.
I got it. I'm with you. I'm with you. Thank you. So there's not additional contract, it's just the contract is misnumbered.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you. What I'm trying to wrap my head around just a little bit, when you originally, and first of all, the decision to relocate your entire operations into Louisiana, into New Orleans was huge. And we thank you for that, because it's, when I learned that Folgers is made in New Orleans, I thought that's pretty cool, actually, rather than anywhere else, you know. What I'm trying to understand is the original application, the original idea of what you were going to do in New Orleans. When you signed the cooperative endeavor agreement in 2010, did that include the contract numbers that are before us today? In other words, have you completed the original set of expansion or work that you were going to do, and this is something additional, or was this part of what you originally planned to do when you relocated everything to New Orleans? Am I making myself clear?
I believe so. So, well, the original
Pull the mic a little bit closer to you, please. I'm sorry.
So,
It'll pull. Just pull it. Yeah, there you go.
the original was completed, and thus the additional ones being asked are building upon the fact that we are fully consolidated here within the city of New Orleans and continue to expand that business and the footprint of our businesses. As we have acquired other brands, we have brought that business into New Orleans. So a perfect example would be, we make a coffee brand called Cafe Bustelo. It was originally produced in Miami, Florida. That business is now produced in the city of New Orleans, which the additional ITEP applications were helping enable.
Okay. Mr. Leonard?
Excuse me, Chairman. The cooperative endeavor agreement period term is from 2010 through 2020. All of the investment, job, and payroll requirements outlined in that agreement run through that term. These investments were all made during the term of that agreement, in which the obligations that were laid out in that, from the incentives perspectives, ITEP was still active during that term, as well as in the event had Folgers been non-compliant at the time these investments were made, then they would have still had fallen under the terms of that contract.
I'm not positive I'm making my question clear, because either that or I'm not clear on the answer. Was the original investment in 2010, was that completed and these contracts are additional expansions, or was everything completed and now this is something that was developed subsequent to the 2010 plans? These contracts, were they developed subsequent to the 2010 plans, or were they part of the original plan?
A part of the original plan, as we were the single source manufacturing now. So as we built 2010, consolidating all the operations, the idea from going forward is any new business that we would bring into our portfolio would then subsequently be produced in New Orleans as a consolidation opportunity, as I mentioned. And then fitting that in under the 10-year agreement that we made in 2010, that was our going in position as we did this. So any decision we've made, we look at sourcing it in New Orleans as the ultimate outcome and bringing that business elsewhere where it's being manufactured to New Orleans. As I mentioned, the one with closing a facility in Miami, Florida, and moving that manufacturing to New Orleans occurred in this period of time.
Okay. And I feel like, and respectfully, I feel like y'all are making arguments to me instead of answering my question. So I'm going to try one more time. I think the original contract in 2010 envisioned about a $69 million investment. Are these contracts part of the original $69 million investment, or are these over and above the $69 million?
These are over and above, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Now we're getting to it. So these contracts were contemplated after you made the decision to come, you entered into the cooperative endeavor agreement. So
Correct.
This was something that was developed subsequent to your decision to come here. Okay, that's where I'm trying to get to. Thank you very much. Do you know when you made application to the city of New Orleans for approval of or let me ask it a different way. Did you make any application to the city of New Orleans for approval of these contracts?
Oh, very technical question.
Or, okay, let me help you out.
Yes, sir.
Or did the notice to New Orleans and the New Orleans subsequent reaction to the notice come from LED? Because normally, let me help you out. Normally what happens, we approve contracts. We approve contracts and the LED sends a notice to the locals saying, we've got these contracts before us. You have X number of days to respond. So what I'm asking is, did you all file any applications with the city of New Orleans, or did New Orleans find out about these programs through LED?
I cannot speak for New Orleans, but we filed all of the 2017, 2018, and 2019 applications after the Board of Commerce and Industry with the City of New Orleans. The City of New Orleans advised us that the 2017 and the 2018 applications were not necessary, and only accepted the 2019 applications for ITEP.
And what were the reasons given for being not necessary?
The City of New Orleans indicated that their resolution that they had passed was not applicable to the 2017 and 2018 applications.
When you say resolution, are you talking about the ordinance?
Forgive me, correct. I stand corrected. The ordinance.
Okay, and this is the ordinance that created the criteria that is being argued is more stringent than the ITEP requirements.
That is correct.
Okay.
The ordinance was passed in 2018. It was 2020 when the applications for all years, 17, 18, and 19, went before the council, and the ordinance was referenced in the decisions rendered by the council as all of the criteria that needed to be met.
Were there any discussions between Folgers and the city of New Orleans or the school board or any of the local entities about what the expansion plans were, or about what you were intending to do under these contracts before you came to LED?
I was not.
I'm not aware.
You're not aware of any meetings that happened, or you just don't know?
At that time, I was not in this role. We can find out that answer for the individuals who were here at the time, but I don't have that answer currently with me. I don't know.
Okay. All right. All right, I'm going to take a time out if there's any other board members that have questions or comments for Folgers folks. We have plenty of folks that want to speak on this issue, and I apologize for monopolizing us so far, but there's some things I need to get clear in my mind. Mr. Holly?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Are you contending that the 6 ITEP approvals that was made by this board fall under the CE&A agreement?
Yes, sir.
And what is your authority for that belief or opinion? Simply because it was for 10 years?
Yes, sir.
Have you had an opportunity to review the CEA before coming here today?
Yes, sir.
And you must be familiar with, if I can get to it, Article 4, I believe. Yes. Article 4, Section 4.01, LED obligations. And it's only 2 paragraphs, so I'll read it in case you don't remember it. Goes on bonds based on your representations made by the company should qualify for the Gulf Opportunity Zone Bond Program, and LED will assist with the application process for and support approved by the commission of the company's application in accordance with the program rules, etc. Second paragraph, industrial property tax exemption. Based upon representations made by the company, the facilities should qualify for the industrial property tax exemption. Louisiana Constitution, Article 7, Section 21F, and LED agrees to support approval by BCNI and the governor of the company's applications therefore. It says the word should. I didn't read the word shall. So are you saying that the word should approve obligates this board to go beyond its rules and regulations, in particular this contract?
No, sir. Our position is there was a recruitment effort by the Louisiana Department of Economic Development to attract Folgers to New Orleans to expand and consolidate its operations. The incentive package that was offered to induce that investment included the industrial property tax exemption, and it included a 10-year term in which that incentive would be offered and available for the company to utilize. The company embarked on this agreement during the first couple of, I think the first 5 years of the agreement, pursuing the industrial tax exemption program without incident. Every application had been approved, and I would believe that there would be a case that there was some level of reliance by Folgers that the cooperative endeavor agreement term was open. It had been receiving approvals for all of its ITEPs. We had a change in the program rules and procedures, and we are stipulating that the rules, I'll say the ordinance of the city council, the resolution of the school board of Orleans, and the procedure that states that the sheriff shall follow the recommendations of the council are the tripwires that caused Folgers to not receive the local approvals for their ITEPs. Because when only the Board of Commerce and Industry rules were applied, their applications were approved. It was not until we ran into local rules and regulations that had eligibility requirements, which one of them was used as a hammer against us through the local process, and that is, in the Board of Commerce and Industry rules, a company can file in advance, spend its money, and so long as it files its application within 90 days of finishing the project, they are still deemed timely. They are still deemed able to pursue ITEP. That is how the program ran very consistently prior to the executive order. The New Orleans rule says you can't do that. You must first, before you file your advance notification, you must go file a local notice of interest with Orleans Parish, then go file your advance notification, and then go start the state process. We could not do that with the 18 and 19 applications because this company was following BCNI rules. So we ran smack dab into whether they claim in their resolutions they use or not. It was not how they wanted their program run at any level whatsoever. The 2019 applications were filed in accordance with every local procedure and guideline of Orleans Parish, and it was deemed denied because it didn't meet the criteria that they established. All 17, 18, and 19 applications were unanimously approved by this board because they met the Board of Commerce and Industry rules and regulations. So the spirit of the arrangement, Folgers, y'all have operations around the state. We want you here in Louisiana. We'll incentivize you to close facilities, move jobs, add payroll, bring that here, and in return, we have these incentives that we're going to offer you. Our position is that worked. Folgers came. They not only met the $60 million they offered when they entered into this deal, they far exceeded it by tens of millions of dollars. They were not a top taxpayer in the parish before this. There are only 3 companies that pay more property taxes than Folgers since LED recruited this company and performed its duties to bring new investment and jobs to this state. All we're asking is that during the term of this agreement, we honor the spirit of the incentive arrangements that were offered.
When the contract was entered into in 2010, the executive order did not exist at that time.
That is correct.
Do you contend that this property, subject to these 6 ITEP exemptions, is or is not subject to the executive order?
If I'm going to take the liberty of opinion. So when the executive order was issued, the executive order clearly delineated a line in the sand, as you all see on your agendas. We have pre-executive order applications that fall under a certain set of rules. They don't have local approvals. We have post-executive order applications that come before this board that must follow the locals. In our opinion, we just feel this cooperative endeavor agreement, which is an agreement between this company and the state of Louisiana, probably should have been part of that grandfather status, because there had already been a commitment made to this company, and they should have been treated in the pre-executive order posture. But they have not been. That did not land in the rules. That is not the case. So we had to follow post-executive order rules and procedures, which landed us unanimously here with the Board of Commerce and Industry rules, but we ran afoul of the rules that Orleans Parish governing bodies have intact that far exceed the rules that this board utilizes to approve.
1 or 2 more questions. Is the property on the tax rolls today,
No, sir.
and why not?
If it's a catch-22, quite frankly. And
I didn't mean it that way.
yes, no, not your question, but putting property taxes on the rolls would cause Folgers to lose their right to pursue appeal and to have an opportunity to have this exemption. So there has been a very strong effort to keep and preserve the rights of Folgers to have our day here before you so we could have a final ruling here. When the tax assessor made an effort to place these property on the rolls last summer, all right, we went to court, okay, and we went to court in Orleans Parish to preserve our rights to have our opportunities to appeal to this board. It was determined, and we have counsel here who can speak more specifically, but the gist of what happened is the court ruled to allow Folgers property to remain off of the rolls. All of the other property in Orleans Parish that was taxable landed on the rolls so that Orleans Parish could receive their revenue. That opinion, which I think is very important, was appealed to the First Court of Appeals in the area. It was denied. Another writ was issued to the Supreme Court of Louisiana, and that writ was denied. So in the decision by the Orleans Parish Court, it was determined that the Board of Commerce and Industry is the proper jurisdiction for handling this matter and not the courts, and they were allowing the property to not be taxed until resolution could be had by this board.
Is there any reason you could not have paid it under protest? Is that from legal advice, or what's the reason there?
Yes, sir. As you may recall, last board meeting, we had a case before here, the Sierra Frat case, where they actually did pay under protest, and they lost those years of exemption.
And my final question, initially when the industrial tax exemption program was given to you back in 2010, was there an estimation at that time of the tax savings that would be made to Folgers?
I'm sure there was, but I'm not aware of that number, sir.
Does 17.8 million sound about correct?
I don't have any reference for that. I apologize.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McGinnis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, without the investment from the 2010 CEA, would you have been able to make the investments in these 6 contracts?
If I understand your question correctly, if we hadn't made the investment in 2010, and again, the investment was greatly influenced by the cooperative agreement. I'm not,
Well, let me,
sure we would, go ahead, I'm sorry.
the whole idea of this recruitment and for you guys consolidating your company in an area, forget about New Orleans, forget about anywhere else, was to expand your company, was to be able to offer new products, is what I'm assuming sitting here. So that original plan is coming together with these 6 investments in the state of Louisiana.
Correct. If there's no 2010, there's no telling if there'd have been anything past that.
Right. So the original notice was that 2010 CEA, if you ask me. If, you know, the city council wants to ask or create a rule of some notice of investment to create consistency for companies like yours, large, who are competing within themselves, much less from state to state, from parish to parish, to be consistent, you would have almost had to know, if you were on the giving end of this exemption, that these things were going to happen.
It's
And
fair-
that
fair statement.
agreement-
Yes.
To me, seems like I would have expected you as a company to do these type of things, and you should have expected from me, if I'm the city of New Orleans, to give you the same exemptions going forward, with everything else being equal, everything else having been complied to, from which I believe everything was complied except for that ordinance from the city of New Orleans.
Correct. And in furtherance to this, from the Center Daily newspaper, November 15, 2013, I read, Smucker's coffee production was consolidated to the New Orleans area as part of a $70 million move announced in 2010, closing plants in Kansas City, Missouri, and Sherman, Texas. That could have been New Orleans, Louisiana, had one of those other facilities been chosen for the consolidation. Orleans won the consolidation competitive battle. In the analysis as to where to put this site, Louisiana put a very competitive offer, a very compelling offer that included ITEP as part of its incentive and recruitment package. As a result, Louisiana is not listed as a location where something was closed. Louisiana has taken a facility that didn't hit the statistical property tax meters in Orleans Parish to be the 4th largest payer in the city. There are only 3 companies that pay more property tax, and that is a direct result of the initial recruitment and then Folger's continued build and continued investment into the parish.
I believe in the executive order. I believe in local control. I wouldn't be up here if I wasn't parish president.
Yes, sir.
So, but just like in my parish, you know, we make mistakes at the local level, especially in the beginning phases of this executive order. So, you know, I just think that this was a mistake, maybe on both ends. And my good friends submitted a letter today, but I think in the best interest of this board, that area, many of those 700 jobs reside in my parish. And for me, it wouldn't be a good thing if we did not approve this today. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments for the folks from Folgers from the board? Mr. Centralone?
Yeah, so a lot has been talked about the commitment of the state. Does the secretary care to commit or comment or clarify what the commitment of the state was in 2010, and did that extend to the contracts? In your opinion, does that extend to the contracts that we have before us?
Don Pearson, Secretary, Louisiana Economic Development. Senator, thank you for the question. Um, Taking a look back at what was negotiated cooperative endeavor agreement, what would the state provide? What would Folgers provide? And then eventually coming to a contract, a handshake, a CEA. And what was enumerated was that a comprehensive package, a very attractive package, was put on the table. As Mr. Leonard correctly points out, Louisiana won the competition, and the two parties had an obligation to each other. Louisiana's package was valued at roughly $53 million. We were asking for two things. One, an investment of at least $69 million. But more importantly, and why economic development performs its important role, was the assurances that Folgers would employ more than 500 people over the following 10-year period and produce roughly average, say, $35 million a year in payroll for each one of those 10 years. That was 2011 through 2020. I think the state performed its obligations. I think the record would reflect that the initial investment went under ITEP approved by this board, and that the financial benefits of that were enjoyed by Folgers. Beyond that, their success, which one could argue the state played a role in, allowed them to make additional investments. And those investments are the ones that are being considered here today by this board.
So does LED have an opinion on the ones before the board today? Was that part of the original obligation? Was it, whether in...
There was no additional obligation. If we went back, we would claw back against Folgers should they have only come with $50 million of investment as opposed to what the requirements were, or if they only employed 400 people instead of the numbers that were directed. So in terms of this agreement, I think all the obligations were met by the parties. And these additional investments were made, they were made post-executive order, so it's in the public record that there will be a voice by the local communities. We may or may not like what the local governing authorities choose to be their basis. But local governing authorities do a lot of things. They make sign ordinances, they make zoning, they make land use ordinances. And so, we respect that, and I think that was the requirement that came forward from the governor, was to respect what parish president wants in his parish. We work in all 64, and it's not uniform throughout the state. That's just part of the uniqueness of our democracy. So I think the issues before the board today are not completely tied to the previous cooperative endeavor agreement in which all parties executed their responsible roles.
But was there it seems there was an implied obligation if they made the additional commitments that there would be, it would continue in the ITEP program as was stated before, or not?
In order for that to be a part of this discussion, and we do this with some of our existing industry, we sit down and we have a conversation about a proposed expansion. And sometimes we work out additional incentive programs related to those and enumerate what these additional investments are. Now, they don't have to come to us, and so they don't always do that. And they can use firms that do this type of consulting work to file the appropriate papers and be advised of the current conditions under which they will ask for these exemptions. But there was not, to my knowledge, a proposed path forward that was executed with Folgers. I could have missed some of that. I was not the secretary at the time.
I understand. Thank you.
I have a question. I think it's for you, Mr. Leonard. Reference has been made to this cooperative endeavor agreement and the word support. LED should, not shall, but should support. What do you think that word means, support?
Very broad term. It's our opinion that the cooperative endeavor agreement laid out minimum expectations for Folgers to meet, which is where the $60 million investment comes from. And that had Folgers not met that minimum investment, they would have been penalized. To not approve an ITEP for exceeding $60 million appears to also be a penalty in its own form. Should means, and to support, we received full support for every ITEP prior to the executive order. I do believe support would have been grandfathering us as part of the executive order process, that we know we have a contract with this company and we've committed to support ITEP, and we're going to have you adhere to the pre-executive orders like other folks who had advance notifications filed. I also think support could have been having folks helping Orleans Parish understand they have a unique project coming before them for approval, and that we do have an agreement, and look at all the great things that this company has done, and your rules are outside of the BCNI rules, and help us lobby and get the support needed at the local level. So it's a broad term. It was not specifically spelled out in this agreement, but our position is more along the lines of reliance on the past. We have an agreement, it's worked perfectly in the past, we're continuing to build off our investments in the future, and we have continued as Folgers to do all the same things that we've done step by step with the investments and the jobs to receive ITEP approvals in hopes that we would in the future.
So are you saying that support would have included some decision by this board to grandfather you into the pre-EO rules? Is that what you're saying?
This is the Board of Commerce and Industry, which is not a part of the cooperative endeavor.
That's where I'm going.
Yes, sir. But I was not aware of any recommendations from any other bodies to do so, which could have been deemed a form of support. So
Could Folgers have avoided this issue entirely by filing advance notifications so as to preclude the necessity of falling under the post-EO rules?
That definitely would have been an option for Folgers, but that would have been contrary to the way they had utilized the program for every year prior to the changes that were coming into place.
But it was an option available?
Yes, sir. It's an option for everybody. Yes, sir.
Okay. These applications, in their only appearance before this board, they were approved. When these applications originally came to this board approved those applications.
Unanimously.
Unanimously.
Yes, sir.
That would be deemed support.
Absolutely. And LED supported us through that process without
I guess what I'm wrestling with is I don't know how we have not supported, how LED and the Board of Commerce and Industry have not been supportive of Folgers. I don't understand that contention, frankly. I want to better understand. I don't understand how we have not been compliant with the contract. I don't understand how LED and Board of Commerce and Industry have not been supportive of Folgers up to this point.
For the record, I don't believe that is a position that is being presented. I think our position is we are asking for your continued support at this time.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we're in agreement. We've been supported thus far.
100%. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, we may have gone a long way around that barn, but I think we got there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments from board members for the Folgers folks? Now, I know we have a lot of folks who have signed up to comment in favor of this special request. I have some 31 cards. I think I don't want to impinge on anybody's right to express themselves, but neither do I want to parade 31 people across the meeting that's going to say the exact same thing. I would welcome the opportunity for one person who may be representative of the 31, if that would be okay. But I'm not inclined to protract this meeting by having 31 people parade and say, I support Folgers. Is that, is there, Mr. Leonard, do you know someone that could come and speak and basically surmise what all 31 of these folks are going to say?
Folgers has a number of employees and friends who have filed cards and have just asked to have the cards read as support into the record for this application.
All right, well, let's do that then. We have Ms. Marianne Marshall, actually speaking against, forgive me, is in the wrong stack. Mr. Chris Tadero is speaking for. Ms. Cheryl Cornick is speaking for. Mr. Chad Renz, R-E-N-Z, speaking for. Tamika Stansberry is speaking for. Nigel Garbett is speaking for. Dave Gower, speaking for. Tracy Ankar, I hope I'm pronouncing some of these names correctly, forgive me if I'm not, speaking for. Lawrence Guerrera, speaking for. Florence Vido, speaking for. Robinique Leboeuf, speaking for. I'm having a difficult time reading. Dave Brockover, I believe. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing correctly. Kenneth Jones, speaking for. Glenn Vinson, speaking for. Donald Alfonso, speaking for. Shauna Ewens. Gerard French. Yvette Rogers. Jean Collins. Jocelyn Thompson. Matthew Hylas, perhaps. I'm sorry. Pavina Gonzalez Aroga. Nathan Mason. Jeanette Knudsen. Jill Smiley. Catherine Cares. Chad Dyer. Christine Herrera. Joe Stanizano. Abby Linville. Frank Ciola, I believe. Those are the cards I have to speak in favor of the project. Oh, forgive me. These are all opposed. We'll come to those in just a moment. All right. Anything else from the Folgers group? Anything in closing?
Sir, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Just one last comment to regroup is, again, the reason we're here are because of the local ordinances that exceed the Board of Commerce and Industry rules.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I know we have a number of folks that want to speak in opposition. Again, we've received I received a packet of information yesterday afternoon that I did not get to read until about 5:30 this morning. Thank you very much. I received another packet of information just now that I've obviously not read at all. So anytime y'all are providing us information to be considered, please give it to us before the meeting. Giving it to me in the middle of the meeting is really not productive in any shape, fashion, or form, because I just don't have time to absorb it. But do we have someone to speak against the special request? Please come forward and state your name. And again, I have only 4 cards of folks that want to speak against, and I'm not inclined to, again, parade the same message over and over again, but if we'll see how we go with this. Yes, sir. State your name.
Thank you. I'm Carlos Luis Zervagon. I'm the Vice President of the Orleans Parish School Board, here to speak on behalf of the board.
Thank you.
I believe y'all did receive a letter from us. All 7 members of the school board signed it. It was also signed by 6 of the 7 members of the New Orleans City Council and the sheriff. All of us asking that you please not entertain this appeal. We feel that we had developed, as you all asked us to, a process. We very much appreciate Folgers. We love having Folgers in New Orleans. You know, in time immemorial, New Orleans has been the biggest area of importing of coffee in the United States. It's deep within our culture and our identity. And having Folgers there, participating in our port as what they do, means a great deal to us as a member of our community. And as they stated, they have prospered in our area under the program as it previously existed. They used some, I felt, very harsh words to describe our local elected body in their presentation a moment ago, saying a lot of things that were not brought up earlier. And if it was so egregious, I'm not sure why it wasn't brought up earlier. You know, I may not be a lawyer, but I am an educator. I know something about government. I know what the needs of our schools are. I know how desperately underfunded they are. We made a unanimous decision that we would like these taxes paid, that the money is too desperately needed for us to forego it. I would suggest, at least from where I sit, the entire integrity of the idea of a local say is at question today. If we follow what we're supposed to do, we go through a process, and now we're finding ourselves here in a 2-year protracted fight, which to us feels like delaying and dragging it out. What I would hope would be the inevitable conclusion that the local say is approved. I would ask y'all to think about that as well. So I'm here representing the unanimous school board, unanimous city council, and the sheriff, asking that this appeal be rejected.
Were you part of the school board when the criteria were developed?
I was not. I came on literally the month after the vote was taken. I did attend the meeting, but I was not on the board at that time.
Have you discussed how the criteria were developed with the members of the school board?
No, that I will leave to staff who know more about that. I did see them.
My problem is staff's not here today.
I know, sir.
And so I'm trying to wrap my head around how those criteria were developed, but you don't have any information one way or the other.
No, I would suggest that maybe others who would follow me to speak today, who've been working on this for a very long time as our partners, could probably answer all of your questions regarding that. I'm here representing the local government officials who are asking you to please respect it. That's my lane.
All I want is information. I apologize. I don't.
No,
you were just a little bit late to the game.
Yeah, I will. But I would emphasize the entire unanimous school board and city council and sheriff have signed the letter asking. I am the one who came on their behest in order to make this appeal to you.
Right. Thank you for making the trip. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from the board? Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Waltzer? Yes, sir. Haven't seen you in too long.
Yes.
Hope you're doing well.
It's nice to be back. Thank you.
Indeed. State your name and your position, please.
My name is Joel Waltzer, and I'm a member of and counsel to Together Louisiana. I'd like to make some comments about the Folger special appeals. In 2020, in the worst of the COVID downturn, the New Orleans City Council and Orleans Parish School Board voted to reject the 6 industrial tax exemption requests filed by Folger under the 2018 rules. Yeah. Folger only appeals now, 2 years after those local rejections, asking the BCI to ignore the elected bodies who still unanimously would like to see the revenue, and to deny them the revenue that the elected bodies decided to keep. Folger's appeals must be rejected. And I have essentially four what I believe are compelling reasons why you should reject these. First, the local ITEP guidelines did not cause the rejection of Folger's exemptions. In fact, in the resolutions denying Folger's exemptions, the City Council plainly stated, the City Council expressly finds that the guidelines, Cal number 32472, does not apply to these applications, which was initiated prior to the passage of the legislative instrument. The same language was included in the resolutions denying each of Folger's exemption requests. Folger did not attach these resolutions or provide them to the board. The resolutions themselves explicitly state that the denials were based on financial need. They simply could not afford the loss of revenue, not connected to any guideline or any criteria that are separated or allegedly more stringent. This is what the City Council resolved. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic, in rejecting these applications, the COVID-19 pandemic has devastated the tourist-based economy of New Orleans and caused an unprecedented budgetary crisis, resulting in significant revenue shortfalls, citywide reductions in public services, and most devastatingly, the furlough of city employees. And whereas the City Council finds that in the current budgetary climate, the need for the immediate tax revenue to bolster the city's devastated finances significantly outweighs the ancillary economic benefits articulated in the application. So they decided to deny the applications based on their financial needs. And the Orleans Parish School Board resolved. Whereas the Orleans Parish School Board's administrative staff further determined that based on the significantly reduced future revenues from the minimum foundation program due to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, the school board cannot fiscally tolerate the additional loss of revenue that would result if said applications were to be granted. And they did this for each of the applications before you. The financial needs of the local governments in providing their citizens with essential services was in fact the centerpiece of the ITEP reforms enacted to give them a voice. BCI has affirmed or abided by the local decisions made on this financial need basis in every other instance. Overturning the local decisions here in the face of necessitous financial circumstances would constitute an improper special treatment to Folgers and Folgers alone and contradict BCI's own promulgated rules and policy reforms. Second, the local guidelines in question, while not the basis of the decision to reject Folgers, were established not in a rogue way, as I believe, at least as I heard it, suggested by Folger. They were established at the explicit direction of this board in its 2018 rules. Rule 503H1 directed that local government entities for each parish, in consultation with the parish assessor and, upon request, the guidance from the department, shall make best efforts, not should, shall make best efforts to develop reasonable guidelines for application approval and or denial within a certain amount of time. And that's exactly what Orleans Parish governmental entities did. The New Orleans City Council and the school board, in a deliberative process that included LED, adhered to this directive and enacted guidelines to review ITIP applications. In the 5 years that followed, neither LED nor the BCI has ever placed Orleans Parish on notice that any of their guidelines were unacceptable or conflict with BCI's, which in fact I believe they don't. Without such notice and a subsequent refusal by Orleans Parish to change, this board must not withdraw the local discretion granted to Orleans Parish, which, as Folger just told you, would be the clear effect of sustaining these appeals, especially where the requests were not caused, were not independently, they were independently denied for financial reasons, which I believe is the right reason according to, that would satisfy the board. You can't withdraw that local discretion, right? And if you wanted to do that, it would require an express directive, and frankly, because it's baked into your regulations, it would require a rulemaking. Third, Folger misconstrues the 2010 Cooperative Endeavor Agreement to suggest that it is entitled to the ITEPs in question. That is simply not the case. As it must, the 2010 CEA was engaged on a specific set of investments which were provided a specific set of inducements. Louisiana made no carte blanche in Kuwait promise, as Folger suggests, to prove all ITEP requests it submitted in the following 10-year period without regard to the merit or regulation. That would effectively yield a 20-year benefit. Further, the 2010 CEA stated that LED would support, as you've already noted, and LED and the BCI have done that in every instance. Louisiana has kept all of its promises. The CEA was made on the SM project to relocate to this state. The CEA listed the exact investments that were going to get ITEPs. In the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement, Louisiana listed the exact set of inducements that it was going to provide. And Louisiana, in fact, provided every one of those inducements and met all of its obligations under the CEA. These applications are separate and they're filed post 2018, which is why they're subject to local discretion. In fact, only one of the LED listed in I requested records, and LED listed the ITEPs that were subject to the 2010 CEA as 2010-0917, 2010-0917A and 0917B, and 2010-0720 and 0720A, none of which are before you today. They've all received their due treatment. Finally, Folgers does not appeal the Orleans Sheriff's rejection of these ITEs. The Orleans Parish Sheriff doesn't have guidelines, right? Nor does it dispute that 20% of the investments made subject to these applications were taxable in any case. Nonetheless, Folgers has not paid any tax on these projects, including the undisputed amounts that would otherwise be owed, right? Though some finally completed as far back as 2018, and it delayed being placed on the taxable rolls by, I believe, falsely certifying that its property was exempted and or that these ITEs were pending, when in fact they were denied long ago, as the staff of LED told Folgers. And again, Folgers claims, even here today, that ITEP Rule 517 precluded it from paying these undisputed amounts, right? Lest they be their ITEPs be automatically denied, when in fact the rules were changed under the 2018 regulatory regime. Rule 517 says exactly the opposite. Folgers should not be rewarded after waiting 2 years to file what we believe is a meritless appeal. So we have attached several documents to our submission to you, including the CEA. There's an exhibit, for instance, the CEA Exhibit C, right, and Folgers provided to you as well. The CEA Exhibit C is entitled Capital Project Budget for Folger Project SM, right? I mean, the cover letter that LED sent said, Louisiana is pleased to offer a comprehensive incentive package valued at $52.67 million for Project SM for Phase 1 and $5.3 million for Phase 2 for Folgers Key Operations Center for a total of $57.9 million. The capital project budget for Project SM was $69 million. In the CEA itself, it says the $69 million is, and that's exactly what the ITEPs, they already received for the $69 million in investments. So the CEA has been satisfied by the state and does not apply here. It does not obligate this board, and frankly, it cannot overrule the 2018 regulations that give local government the discretion and authority to decide up or down whether or not they can afford it. And that's exactly what they did, and they decided that they could not afford these, particularly at the very height of the COVID pandemic, right? And so the other, let's see. Well, I think I'll let someone else talk about the other documents. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Let's just be sure we set the table here. There is no argument, is there, that the school board and the city council enacted criteria that are different from ITEP, from the state ITEP criteria? Do we agree on that?
Pursuant to Rule 517, they were directed to, and they did in fact, make their own guidelines.
Okay, now Rule 517, it's actually Rule 503H2, and what it says is they shall make best efforts to develop reasonable guidelines. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So really, we get to debate what reasonable means. Is that fair? Whether these criteria that are more strict than the state regulations, are they reasonable or not? Isn't that really the debate?
We can, to me, if there is some feeling that they are not reasonable, then you should be working with your local partner to resolve those differences, not withdraw their ability to have, without notice, withdraw their ability to have.
So it would be your position then that if we did work with the city of New Orleans and the school board to try to educate them on why their ordinances were not good, that would have been appropriate. If we had done that, that would have been appropriate.
Prior to yanking their local discretion, I would imagine yes.
Okay. So if we have somebody come up and say, yeah, we did in fact do that, then that we would have checked that box for you.
The regulations didn't cause the rejections.
Well, we'll get
New
to that.
Orleans is
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
We're not there yet. I know I move at a slower pace than you do, but just let me get there. So the school board and the city both adopted criteria that are at least different from ITEP, and we can argue whether they're reasonable guidelines or not. Let me ask you this. If the city of Lafayette, for example, because of its heavy reliance on the fossil fuel industry, decided to enact an ordinance that said, we are only going to grant ITEP manufacturing applications to those manufacturing processes that employ fossil fuels and none other, would that be a reasonable guideline?
It's not one that I would politically agree with, but I'm not in a position to say that.
So I guess then your position then is any criteria that any municipality passes must therefore be okay. Because I think most people would agree that is a pretty out there criteria.
But we're not talking.
Well,
yes,
no,
they are.
We may argue where the lines are, Mr. Waltzer, but the question is, are there lines Is there something that's unreasonable? Is there something that's unreasonable in
I
your
mean,
mind?
in what everybody would normally, consider reasonable and unreasonable, I have subjective lines, and you have subjective lines.
Exactly.
We're not the elected bodies of Orleans Parish. We're not the elected bodies of the city of Lafayette. They have their own reasons and their own policies. New Orleans is a home rule charter, and they have their own, for instance, residency requirements and other things that they do all the time. And I'm not in a position to tell you that they
I
can or
can't
cannot
let
do
the
that.
home rule charter comment go unaddressed.
Okay.
Because the
I mean,
problem.
it's not germane, right?
Excuse me,
Right.
this is.
Yeah, your show.
Exactly, thank you. Yes, New Orleans is a home rule charter, and frankly, that was one of the first questions I asked when this issue came up. But then I realized that the Board of Commerce and Industry is also a constitutional mandated body with powers equal to, and in this position, and at least in Jones's opinion, as far as ITEP is concerned, high and above any municipality, including home rule municipalities. Because we are specifically under the Louisiana Constitution granted the authority to determine only this board and the governor are empowered to determine what is in the best interest of the state as it refers to ITEP. Not the city of New Orleans, not the city of Mamou.
Right.
Only this board and the state and the governor.
And
So when the city of New Orleans or the city of Lafayette or the village of Mamou decide to pass ITEP requirements that are different from what this board has passed, they have to be judged by this board as whether they're reasonable. And I think we have to agree, if something is reasonable, there must therefore be something that is unreasonable. So what we have to decide today as a board are these criteria reasonable? Jones has an opinion, obviously. Other board members may have an opinion, but we'll get to that in a minute. Next question. First of all, so the school board passed criteria, the city passed criteria, the sheriff, we don't have any idea whether he passed criteria or not.
did not.
Well, don't know. I mean, he has a meeting every morning when he shaves, so we don't know what was going on inside the sheriff's mind when he signed the letter, so we don't know whether he has criteria or not. Or do you?
My understanding that he does not. He's based on and the city and the school board.
Wait.
He is my understanding, and I don't know. I haven't spoken to him.
Okay, all right, so that's where I'm going. We
But
don't
this
know what the
board-
sheriff's
This
criteria
board
is.
exercised its constitutional discretion and provided the local governments, right, with the right that is involved here.
To make reasonable guidelines. Okay.
No,
next.
and with the right of rejection.
Yeah, they have the right of rejection. We're going to get to that as well. Now, you said that let's first of all, the school board resolutions themselves, they don't mention whether the criteria are specifically relied on or not. They cite the school board basically says, these are our criteria, they don't meet them. Oh, by the way, we also need the money. Now, you may argue it the other way. They may say, we need the money and they don't meet our criteria. That's what the school board says, correct? Essentially.
I believe so.
I mean, I can read them into the record, but essentially they say, we need the money and we're going to reject these, but they also don't meet our criteria.
Yes.
Okay. The city, however, is a little bit more clever. The city says, we need the money, and we're going to reject it. We also have these criteria. And on some of these contracts, we passed the criteria before the application was filed. Right?
Yeah.
And therefore, the criteria don't apply.
Right.
But on 2 of those applications, 4 out of the 6, 4 they said the applications were filed before the criteria were passed, but on 2 of them they say no, the criteria, the application were filed after the criteria was passed, and we do apply the criteria. Now, If that's the case, and as I read the ordinance, and this is what is particularly strong to me, as I read the ordinance, and again, I, like you, probably are doing this on a volunteer basis, but I sometimes get to wear my lawyer's cap as well. But as I read the Shreveport City Council ordinance, this is what it says, and I'm going to quote from Section 3 of the ordinance. If the request fails to satisfy all of the above criteria, the City Council resolution shall disfavor and reject the application. Period. It had no option but to deny the criteria if the ordinance was passed after the application. No option at all. It has to. It has to follow its own ordinance. Can't ignore it. So sticking in the dictum after the fact that says, oh, by the way, we also need the money, I don't think erases the fact that the criteria, which is different from the ITEP rules, was the basis for the decision. And oh, by the way, when you go back and read the committee, if you read the committee the subcommittee of the city council that judged everything, you know where they spent the bulk of their time? Not on the fact that that the city doesn't have money. They spent the bulk of their time judging their criteria. And judging, do they meet our criteria? Yes, no, yes, no. And in their conclusion, they say they don't meet the criteria. Period. That's the subcommittee of the city council. So when the subcommittee goes to the city council, they're saying, city council, they don't meet the criteria. So to come in and say that the basis for the city's decision was that we need the money, I think is disingenuous, not perhaps intentionally, but because they have an ordinance with criteria that they applied, and they applied stringently, and they said you don't meet it. I don't think they could have done anything other than disapprove. You care to respond?
You have to give your local partner some ownership of its own decisions. You can't change the decision for them. They stated as an independent. Please.
No. This is my room. This is my room. It's not your room, Mr. Waltzer. I'll allow you to respond, but I'm going to take your contentions as they come up. We do have the right to ignore them. Under the Constitution of the state of Louisiana, this board and the governor gets to decide what's in the best interest of the state of Louisiana. And again, this is just Jones talking. This isn't the rest of the board. But in my humble opinion, when we have a state program that has state criteria, clear criteria, and if a municipality wants to impose a more stringent criteria than what this board has approved, they are basically saying, listen, we want that state program that you have over there, we want to do it our way. And they're basically going to supplant the state's authority with their own. And this is what happens, Mr. Waltzer, is that if the city of New Orleans and the school board of New Orleans gets its way, the contract never even makes it to the governor's office. It doesn't even get there. He can't decide what's in the best interest of the state because they've basically usurped his power and this board's power by imposing rules that are more stringent than this board imposed. Now, I'm going to tell you, if that's in the best interest of the state of Louisiana, I need to quit this board. And I need to go do something else with my volunteer time. Because, yeah, I know that's what you wish I'd do, but I'm not doing it today.
That's not what I wish you do.
No, I'm kidding. I'm picking at you now. But that's the problem. And you know, when this board passed the resolution to allow the appeal, if that didn't tell New Orleans that there was a problem with their process, they weren't listening. Because the resolution was passed by this board in express response to the ordinance that East Baton Rouge and the city of New Orleans was passing and the school board were passing. So to say that somehow this board and the state of Louisiana and LED have not communicated to New Orleans, they're not, I know they call it the free state of New Orleans, but they know what's going on up here in Baton Rouge as well. They know that. So they knew that they're coloring, and today they know they're coloring outside the lines. But they're still choosing to do so. And that's their prerogative, but they do not get to usurp the prerogative of this board and the governor to make a decision to what's in the best interest of the state of Louisiana as far as these ITEP contracts are concerned. I'm going to give you one last comment, and then we're going to move on.
So I don't believe that they have usurped. I believe that this board has constitutional discretion. Like the Public Service Commission, like other bodies, it exercised that discretion and created a local option, I guess I'll call it, right? And it directed the guidelines, and New Orleans and every one of the local governmental entities have told you that the basis, that they have an independent basis, that regardless of the guidelines, they can't afford it, right? So if they can't afford it, it would be an adequate reason under this board's judgment, right? Then there's no causation. Then I think it would be improper to grant these.
Let me tell you what would be inappropriate. The state of Louisiana goes after a company, and they compete with every other state in the country that wanted that company to come to it. And they bend over backwards to make sure that company comes here. And that company comes and they perform well, they pay their taxes, they employ people, they become one of the top 5 taxpayers in the city. And the state of Louisiana does that. And then we refuse the program that is available to that company. And we send that message to every other company that we might try to recruit to this state and say, listen, we have this program, but oh, by the way, we allow our municipalities to really run it. That would be a problem. That would be a real problem. I know that New Orleans is having difficulty with their taxes, as is every other governmental entity in this state. If that becomes the basis on which we make decisions, we never compete for companies to come here. I know that some people believe we ought to get rid of incentive programs, let companies live or die. That may be what you want to, but then you better learn to be a farmer, because there won't be many other jobs available to you. The fact is, this state has made the determination somewhere along the line that we are going to be a manufacturing state, and that it's so important we're going to give manufacturers the most valuable incentive this state has to offer. We've made that decision as a matter of policy, and it's enshrined in our Constitution. And if we somehow then say, but municipalities, you get to decide by your own set of rules and your own set of guidelines whether you like this company, like going to my Lafayette example, saying, we just don't want you unless you're a fossil fuel company. If we're going to allow municipalities that sort of discretion, then we might as well turn the whole program into a local program and just do away with LED, do away with the Board of Commerce and Industry, and we'll just allow local municipalities to do their own economic development and let them compete with Texas and Mississippi and Alabama on their own.
So
I think that's a bad idea.
financial reasons are not a good reason.
Financial is a good decision if you don't have criteria. If you've adopted criteria that are different from this board's criteria, no, it's the financial reason is no longer the reason.
Then
Mr. Waltzer, the ordinance says you shall deny the request if you don't meet the criteria. They didn't have a choice. It wasn't an option.
They were going to do it anyway as the independent basis that I'm
Mr.
you know,
No,
you're not going to convince me.
Listen, the message that I think I want to go out is that municipalities in Louisiana or school boards or sheriffs or parish bodies, if you want to develop your own set of criteria, listen, we had a situation here not too long ago where one of our parishes wanted to negotiate their own pilot with one of the companies. And we said, no, you can't do that. It's 80-20. You're not going to be able to negotiate your own pilot under the ITEP program. You either deny the application or you take 80-20. We've been 100% consistent with this. And the message that we need to send to the local governing entities and listen, I've been a local government advocate all my adult career. I was city attorney for 8 years. I know what local government needs as well as you do. But this program is not a local government program.
I don't know how you tell a local government you shall make efforts to develop reasonable guidelines and then come and say, and the only reasonable guidelines are the ones that we already have in place. That makes no sense.
You could have all sorts of things that the QJ requirement. We have a job requirement and we have a job requirement in ITEP that is defined. And New Orleans said, no. We don't want that job requirement. We want the job requirement that's on steroids. We already have a program that's called Quality Jobs. They wanted to incorporate the Quality Jobs program into ITEP. If you think that's reasonable, that's unworkable. Unless all you want is, manufacturing jobs for this program is very clearly defined, and New Orleans went way beyond. And the application process, Mr. Leonard, I happen to agree with him. Mr. Leonard's position on the application process, that's not workable. Local government has its role in this process. The governor and this board has seen fit to do that. That's fine. But when they start to try to say, but we're going to be a little bit smarter than LED about this, and we're going to make this program a little tighter, we're going to make it a little bit tougher. That's where they color outside the lines. That's the problem. And that's the problem with these criteria in this situation. But that's just Jones. All right? All right, Mr. Waltzer, I think you and I are done. How about Ms. Hanson or... Ms. Hanson, I'm going to ask you to limit your comments to those points not already made by Mr. Waltzer, so we don't.
Understood, thank you. My name is Erin Hanson. I'm a resident of Orleans Parish and here representing Together Louisiana. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And apologies for the late delivery of the packet. I want to just draw your attention to a few items that have not yet been lifted up from the packet, specifically on page 11. In answer to your question, Mr. Hawley, about the total tax benefit associated with the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement in 2010, the tax benefit was for $17.8 million, and that covered 5 industrial tax exemption program applications that Mr. Waltzer delineated. In fact, between 2010 and 2016, this board approved 21 applications, and that covered $22.3 million worth of industrial tax exemptions for Folger Coffee Company. So just to underscore Secretary Pearson's point, the state fulfilled and it in fact exceeded its obligations to the company according to the 2010 Cooperative Endeavor Agreement. And finally, just want to speak to the resolutions passed by this board in 2020, the February 2020 resolution that states that LED, on behalf of the board, will continue to work with local interests to establish guidelines consistent with the process and qualifications for the exemption established by this board. And to lift up that it seems that the argument is being made that this resolution on its own was sufficient to notify Orleans Parish governing bodies that their resolution was in conflict with the guidelines established by the board to approve or deny exemptions. And My belief is that it's not a sufficient notification to Orleans Parish that their rules are out of line or that they should be adjusted. To my knowledge, Orleans Parish governing authorities have not had the opportunity to have not received notice from the state that their guidelines are out of line or had the opportunity.
Have you ever asked them that question?
I have not.
Okay, so you don't know whether they received any information from LED or not about their ordinances?
We have been in close communication with the local governing authorities.
But
and
did you ask the question?
I did not.
Did anybody you know ask the question?
I don't know the answer to
Okay,
that
well,
question.
okay, Ms. Hanson, because the problem I have is you're making allegations that it didn't happen when you didn't even ask to see whether it happened.
We did submit a public records request related to all the communication around Folgers from LED, and there was nothing in the record about that communication.
You recognize that there's telephone calls, that there's public meeting or private meetings, there's cups of coffee, there's all sorts of ways to communicate that are not subject to a public records request.
May I ask Secretary Pearson if...
No, you may not. You may not. We'll have information coming to you, but we do not ask questions of the board. Our job is you're entitled to make comments and to listen, but you're not entitled to ask questions. This is the issue that is important here, is that the city of New Orleans was tasked with, again, the word reasonable is an important one. And I'm not going to go back through that with you, but the reality is that LED did try to communicate with New Orleans, and New Orleans chose to ignore those communications. And I'll have somebody tell you all about that in a few minutes. But no, I'll just leave it at that for now. Okay, continue your points.
Just the last point that I would make is that an appeal under the rules, under the resolution that was passed in 2020 by this board, allow the company the opportunity to appeal a local decision, and that doesn't constitute the right to an approval of an exemption request. So notwithstanding any conflict between the local rules and the rules of this board, Folger is not entitled by fact of that conflict alone to an approval of its request. It's just entitled to the appeal. And so what we're considering today is whether that appeal, given what we've learned about the investments and whether they do or don't fall under the cooperative endeavor agreement and beyond, are legitimate.
If you're saying that Folgers has a right to appeal, they don't have a right to win the appeal, I agree with that. If that's we still get to determine the merits of the appeal.
That's right.
Okay, I agree with that 100%. Okay. Anything else? All right. I have a card from Ms. Marianne. Yes, thank you. I'm not reading the writing very well. Yes, just pull the mic a little bit closer to you, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Ann Mushat. I am a resident of Orleans Parish. I am a member of Together New Orleans, Together Louisiana, but I am here as a taxpayer and the mother of two sons who are probably not going to be coming back because the jobs that they are well qualified for don't exist here. And one of the reasons I believe that they don't exist here is that you all give these tax exemptions that impoverish our public schools, our streets, our health clinics, and our sheriff and police departments. We are the last or the bottom three in public health, public education, and quality of life. And studies have shown that is what brings quality industries. And no offense to Folgers in that. But I'm just livid. I'm livid at you all. Y'all are talking about the authority of the state. Well, isn't that to enhance the quality of life of its citizens, and not its corporate citizens only, but its people? How can y'all look at yourselves in the mirror?
All right, do you have anything else substantive to say other
I think
than?
that was substantive.
Other
And
than,
I
the,
think
other
y'all
than
have
the fact that
lost
you're
sight
livid,
of
it was
that.
substantive. I don't want to hear how livid you are. I don't want to hear whether I should be able to look myself in the mirror or not. Up to that point, you did fine. If you want to continue with your substantive comments, you may do so.
Thank you. I shall. The legislative body has decried the possibility of increasing teacher pay if our corporate citizens paid their taxes. The money would be available to enhance our education that will create the workforce of the present and the future. Right?
Actually, no, I'm not going to let that go.
Okay.
You ever been to Morehouse Parish? You know where Morehouse Parish is?
No. But
Okay,
I-
it's
but
in
I have
northeast.
been
It's in the
there.
northeast part of the state.
I have been to the northeast
Okay,
part
but
of the state.
you've not been to Morehouse Parish because not many people have been to Morehouse Parish.
Is Monroe?
No,
is-
it's not Monroe. That's Washita Parish.
Okay.
This is, if you don't have corporations to pay their taxes, you don't have good schools. You know, we had a project before us, and when we were doing, you know, the work that you find so disdainful, when we had a project before us in Morehouse Parish that was a solar farm. A solar farm creates one job. And we're supposed to figure out, okay, are we going to grant that or not? And it was real interesting to me because there's a problem here. You know, we want renewables, but yet it only creates one job. Is solar really manufacturing electricity? All that debate. But you know what Morehouse Parish was really interested in?
No.
The very fact that agricultural land that was formerly fallow agricultural land, by being converted from an agricultural tax basis to an industrial tax basis, increased their tax revenues by almost 40%. And they wanted this program. They wanted that thing to be approved because they are such a poor parish, they don't have any corporations to pay taxes because they haven't been able to attract any corporations to Morehouse. So they wanted a solar farm just so it would increase their tax base. So when you decry corporations not paying their taxes, you've got to first have corporations in those parishes in order to pay taxes. And believe it or not, corporations get to choose where they're going to locate. They get to choose whether it's going to be Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, or anywhere else they want to go. And as a result, this department works its tail off trying to recruit those businesses. But in order to get them here, they have to make this place more attractive than other places. Yes, they like quality of life. Do they want to go where there's crime? No, they really don't. So you need to clean up your crime in New Orleans too, by the way. So let's talk about that if you want to. But to come in and say this program is somehow doing something to keep New Orleans from reaching its goals, this program is what putting corporations in Orleans Parish so that you may reach your goals. Instead of fighting corporations, you need to be working to attract corporations.
I'm not fighting corporations. I just want them.
To pay their taxes. I get that. But we have programs that say if you'll come to Louisiana, you don't have to pay them all the time. You have to pay them for a period. You get an abatement while you're getting the company going, and then when you get this equipment, you don't have to pay it. But Folgers has moved from being out of the top 10 to become one of the top 4 taxpayers in all of New Orleans. And you come here and you want to criticize this program on Folgers, which has done exactly what you've asked them to do. They've created more jobs than they promised. They've created higher payroll than they're promised. Your children that don't have to leave Louisiana, they come to work for Folgers. What? You don't want them to work for Folgers?
My son works for General Motors in Detroit. He's embedding computer systems in cars.
So he could have gone to work for General Motors in Shreveport when General Motors was there until it was shut down because, well, 2008 election, but nevertheless. Ma'am, I don't want to argue with you, but I am not going to let people sit at that table and make allegations against this program and this board of volunteers who working their tail off to try to bring companies to this state and decry us for doing what we believe is in the best interest of the state of Louisiana.
And isn't it my right to just come here and say I disagree?
You can, but you're not going to say the things you're saying to this board. You're not going to say that we should not be able to look ourselves in the mirror.
All right, I apologize. I
Thank you.
apologize for that.
Thank you.
I was very upset at what you were saying.
Okay. Do you have anything else to add?
I'm just asking you, as a taxpayer myself, to reconsider. Because as a taxpayer, I just feel like I'm left out of this equation. I do. I don't get a tax exemption of 80% of my taxes.
Actually, you get a homestead exemption if you own a home. $75,000.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty big deal.
All right. I just
Thank you, ma'am.
disagree.
Appreciate you being here.
Jones.
All right, Mr. Baggert?
Mr.
I'm sorry.
Jones, may I make a
Mr.
comment?
Nasser?
I knew when I walked in this morning that this was going to be this type of meeting, which is good that everybody has a right to say what they have to say. I agree with what you said. I can look myself in the mirror every day. I might not like what I see because of my age, but I can look myself in the mirror. In St. James Parish, where I'm from, industry pays between 70 and 80% of the ad valorem taxes. One of our local industries shut down a couple of years ago, and we felt it bad. I've been on the school board for 28 years. I just retired at the end of December 2022. We had to lay off 30 people when that one company shut down. So let's stop and think about not only the ad valorem taxes that they do pay, of course, through the program that the state offers, but what about the sales and use tax? Sales and use tax on a $1 billion construction or a $1 billion facility. Let's just say a local entity collects 2.5% of the sales and use tax on that $1 billion facility, how much money that is. I just want everybody to stop and think about it. Is this controversial? Of course it is. Of course it is. Has Folgers done as much and more than what they say they would? Yes, they did. Do I believe in local autonomy? As our parish president said earlier, I believe in local autonomy. I really do. But we have to sit down and look at everything when we make a decision. Now, if the criteria was used to deny the application, to deny the exemption, that's a different story than just denying it straight out because they wanted it the 80-20 after the 2018 executive order. So I'm not going to sit here and argue back and forth what should or shouldn't happen, but I just want everybody to realize the amount of money that is paid when an industry locates in a parish, in a community, the sales and use tax, not only on what's the material that's being used to build it, but the recurring sales and use tax after this company goes into operation. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nasser. We have a card from Mr. Baggert. Mr. Broderick Baggert. State your name, your position, please.
Still good morning for another 3 minutes. My name is Broderick Baggert with Together New Orleans and Together Louisiana. And you know, we've been at this for a while. And I may say early on, when you don't always get what you want, you can sometimes have a too narrow and prejudicial view of the people with whom
who don't give you everything we want. When the initial reforms were made, the fact that they didn't reach back and apply to all the existing contracts, boy, what a missed opportunity from our perspective. The fact that they didn't apply to the renewals, we thought that was the wrong decision, didn't like it. Might have even fallen into the tendency or temptation to say, you know, those so-and-sos just want to give away the farm. May have even, on one instance that I can think of, for my case personally, attributed that to the members of the staff, not just the board. And then you know, you go through meetings and see how people are in certain circumstances, different circumstances, and my takeaway from all that is what people are working hard for this department, and they are trying to be fair, and they're trying to be fair when they're balancing interests, the interest of local entities, the interest of companies, the interest of taxpayers, and that in particular when it comes to the staff, but all of you as well, people are doing their best. The way that the local officials of the city of New Orleans have been described in this meeting is not accurate or fair. And I say that because I was there for most of the meetings. They got a set of rules from you that said, develop guidelines. It said, within 60 days of the promulgation of these rules, the local government entities for each parish shall make best efforts to develop reasonable guidelines. And there was an extensive process of deliberation about that, in which members of the school board, members of the administration of the city of New Orleans, members of the city council were balancing. We do not want to lose a single company. We do not want to lose a single job. We do not want to disincentivize anything. We certainly don't want to run afoul of the Board of Commerce and Industry, which has the constitutional authority that it has in a specific way sort of extended to include our input. And all of those local officials, with citizens taking part, went through that process and did their very best. And then subsequent to that, a resolution was passed that said, if you conflict, if your standards conflict with the local guidelines, then there's this right for an appeal to be heard. You said that that was in direct response to the New Orleans guidelines, as though that was entirely clear. I can tell you that was not clear, at least to us, and we did ask, right? I mean, did they say you've, now I take for granted that there's gonna be people who say you informed them that their guidelines were out of step. I don't deny that. When that resolution was passed, which felt like, oh, well, that would have been good to know beforehand. What does conflict mean? Does conflict mean different from? If so, why direct them to establish guidelines if they're not meant to be different from? There was no indication that it being more stringent was a problem until subsequently, right? So then we go back and say, okay, now the Board of Commerce and Industry has done this. What do you want to do? And I think they're in a fix. They've had hundreds of people through dozens of meetings deliberate about what our standards ought to be and came out where they came out. And their decision was, look, we've gone through this whole process. At the time, anyway, they had not gotten any clear directive that these were conflicting with the State Board of Commerce and Industry, or that they had thereby self-revoked their ability to have that local discretion. If that communication was sent, then I'm gonna go get real mad at our local officials for not communicating that to us, right? I mean, if they were informed that their local authority to say yay or nay has been revoked because of their standards, then you're right. I mean, they certainly should have changed their actions. That said, the idea that they were trying to thumb their nose at you or do their own thing, that's a story we've got about New Orleans. Sometimes people call it a meme. It's like, yeah, we know that about New Orleans, just doing it. That was not the spirit or intent
of any of the local officials or citizens who took part in the process to try to figure out what should our guidelines be. We were trying to do what you directed us to do. There are communications in these reams of documents that we got of the city of New Orleans communicating with your staff and saying, hey, these Folgers exemptions passed. Not in any tricky way, but saying we have determined that 4 of these that came in before our guidelines were established do not apply to our local guidelines. Those will be developed or decided on independent of all that. And then that is reflected in their resolutions. They made that determination because it seemed right. I think it was also, and then they included language on the other 2 to say, look, with this resolution, we don't know where things are. Let us be clear that even when the ones that were the guidelines did apply, that it was not those that did it. It was that we needed the money. And I understand the place that puts you in, right? But this was attempting to balance, in their case, the participation and involvement of literally hundreds of citizens and dozens of hours of local officials to arrive at something, and then a subsequent decision to kind of put that into question, their attempt to balance that. If Folgers had acted on their exemption requests in a timely way and not had those applications delayed, intentionally delayed, then they would not have been, they would have been approved before the local guidelines and before any right to appeal, and we wouldn't be here. Instead, they asked for delays, received delays, got consideration after local guidelines had come into effect, and a city that says, we want to be clear, even in an internal email to your staff, in a public decision-making process, those local guidelines were not going to be the reason they were decided. That, I would just say, the spirit with which you have characterized, Mr. Jones, the actions and intent of our local officials in our local community has not been accurate, has not been fair, and the spirit with which you've interrogated some of the people who spoke before you, maybe fairly in some case because of what was said, right? But I mean, even before that, does not seem like it captures the spirit of what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do what we understand, and sometimes it's moving around, to be the intent of this board. And this board said, develop local guidelines. We did. Then it said, if there's a problem, then there's a right to appeal. And then we said, fine, the guidelines did not apply. It was before that. And yet the characterization has been, look, there goes New Orleans again, questioning our authority, doing its own thing, trying to dance to the beat of its own drum. I don't know if that's the case for the city at large. It's not the case through this process. It's not been their intent. It's not been our intent. We've been trying to do, in the spirit of public citizenship, what you asked us to do. Thank you.
And Mr. Bragg, before you go, I'm not going to argue with you. I don't believe anybody was trying to be nefarious. I don't believe that at all. And if I've implied that, or that's not my intent, and I apologize for it if that's the perception that I conveyed, because that was not my intent. What I'm trying to convey is that this program is not a municipal program. It's not a local government program. And that the rules in this situation made it more than what this, I think that's my problem, is that they went too far. If they, for example, I know that when we were developing the rules, when we were talking about the setting, I remember I was sitting right over there in one of our meetings. And I was saying that, you know, what needs to happen at the local level is this, and I use St. James Parish as an example, because back pre-executive order, when you went to the St. James Parish if you were in industry trying to do a project, you went to St. James Parish. The parish council wouldn't meet with you without the school board or the sheriff or the tax assessor being there. They set up their own process how they were going to evaluate projects, and so because they had had a bad experience years ago, they made sure that their local entities worked in concert with one another so that it was all, and that was the concept, is that you set up local guidelines so that when a company comes to you, that all of us, frankly, again, just Jones, when I was sitting right over there and voted for this, that the language in the rule, what I was hoping for was a streamlined process so that companies wouldn't have to go to 14,000 meetings trying to get something approved, that there would be a very concise way of dealing with things.
You know where you stand,
Exactly.
predictability. We don't have to keep fighting this stuff. We don't have to spend all of our time. It's not great either on this side. That was exactly the intent. Clarity, predictability.
Right. So,
and
all I'm saying is that in my world at least, they reached too far by changing the requirements of the program. That's all I'm trying to communicate. And again, if I communicated anything to the contrary, I apologize.
So I understand that perspective. It's a Folgers pen, I just realized.
You're welcome to write with it, I'm sure.
Yeah, like one of our best volunteers in a church in New Orleans East is a Folgers employee. Our member institutions are filled with Folgers employees. The idea that we want or can even sustain an antagonistic relationship with our business community is another impression that I would say is entirely false. It is much easier to sustain healthy, good, positive relationships when things are clear and they stop shifting around, right? When a company makes an investment, the next year it goes on the tax rolls unless they have an exemption. And then suddenly you have one that doesn't have an exemption. They have an application for an exemption, and it goes 3 years still, and you're like, what's going on? Because that's one of the biggest ones there. If they don't have an exemption, there's nothing in the law that says the intent to apply for an exemption grants you a de facto exemption that you can act on informally. That starts to fray, because what do you say? If you say, that's wrong, that's not according to the law, then you're against the company? I guess so, right? Are we? No, we're not. The breakdown of the enforcement of the laws as they exist, when you start to have one set of rules for one group and another set of rules for somebody else, it creates the impression of contestation and conflict when it doesn't exist. And I'll just say this. I've never heard you talk about a single company the way you talked about local officials today. I've never heard you talk to a single company.
You weren't
even
here.
Erring.
You weren't here.
Even erring. I was here the whole morning.
No. You weren't here about 6 months ago. There was somebody sitting right in that chair that heard pretty strong message.
Even erring. Typically, there is an attempt to be considerate and fair. And what I would say, if the process and methodology that this board has used, which is to say, we're not going to change the rules and then hold one of the bodies that's seeking a decision accountable for rules that were not in place at the time their decisions were made. If you follow that same procedure, then you'll reach the conclusion that those exemptions, especially the ones that were before rules were applied, and the rulemaking process at the local level, at your discretion, at your instruction, those should not prejudice local entities. If you treated local entities and local communities the way you treat companies, we don't think you'll grant these appeals. We think that you will say what we understand you to say and the governor say. At the end of the day, constitutionally, this is your authority. Financially, this is local money, and local decision makers know better. And if they don't, they have the right to make their own judgments about their local tax base. That's what we understand to be the intent, the spirit, the goal of the reforms. It will be a departure from that practice and that goals if you grant this appeal, and we hope you don't.
Thank you for your opinion. That's all the cards I have. Ms. Porter, would you come up, please?
Moving around in the chair. Trying to get up here.
State your name and your position with the department,
Robin
please.
Porter, Executive Counsel, LED.
I understand there's been much debate as to whether there was discussions between LED and the municipalities and the school board concerning the rules that the criteria that they develop. Would you educate us on that a little bit?
Yes, as of the end of 2019, staff met with Councilwoman Morano or Councilman Morano, and at that time, that visit was to talk to and convince her to change the local rule. We had been made aware that the rules that were, or the ordinances that were approved, they were in conflicts. So that's the first instance. The second, probably more towards early 2020, staff met with the City of New Orleans economic staff. That's Tracy Jackson, Ellen Lee, and Jeffrey Swartz. Also then, to explain and talk about the fact that the local guidelines, they were in conflict with the ITEP rules, even to such an extent where LED was thinking about, okay, so what kind of workaround possibly we may be able to do? Maybe have something that can be automated to notify a company if they're thinking about going into Orleans Parish, to send them directly to where the rules are so they could take a look at that and have an understanding about what they may come up against. So even to that extent, they were trying to do some type of workaround. And the third instance, I believe, was, yes, G&O Inc., again, where it was pointing out where the rules were in conflict. So at no time was, or did LED not make the locals aware at that time that the rules that they had implemented and adopted were in conflict with the local ITEP rules or the state ITEP rules. So.
Any questions for Ms. Porter?
I do.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Yvette Cola. Did you get a response from the locals when you informed them each time of the conflict of the rules? What was their response?
The response was, the rules are the rules. They were not receptive to the change, which is the reason why we were thinking about doing a workaround to make the companies aware to go to where the rules were, to take a look to see what they may be coming up against in the parish. They weren't receptive to change.
Any other comments or questions from Ms. Porter?
I have a question. State your position one more time for me, please.
Executive Counsel for LED.
Okay. Are you familiar with the continuing agreement that LED had with Folgers 10 years ago, 2010?
The CEA, yes.
Yes, CEA.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
It seems like today that Folgers has taken the position that these last 6 contracts is governed by that continuing agreement. What is your opinion about that?
I have a difference of opinion about that. I think that the 6 contracts that are in question today are outside the purview or the scope of the 2010 CEA. I also think that Section 4.02B does not mean or obligate LED to ensure approval of the company's ITEP applications in perpetuity. So that's my opinion on that.
And these contracts were under the executive order. They were made when the executive order was in effect.
The 6, yes.
And therefore, it's your opinion that the 20% would be owed to the governing authorities in Orleans Parish?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawley. Anything else from Ms. Porter? Thank you, Ms. Porter. All right. It's time to entertain a motion. Okay, Mr. Sloan?
Yeah, I'd like to entertain a motion that we approve this. I know it's been very contentious and there's a lot of conversation going around, but if I go right back to what this board's authority is, I would utilize that as the basis for a motion to approve.
We have a motion from Mr. Sloan, a second from Mr. Bishop to, I'm trying to understand what the motion is. Is it
The motion to approve the.
to approve all
yeah.
6 contracts?
All 6 contracts.
Okay. Yep, absolutely. We're gonna have plenty of opportunity for comment and questions. All right, so we're not gonna run to vote. All right, first, who's up first? Major Toops?
I'll go.
Go ahead.
As a representative of local government, and I'm as close to the local government as you can get, the boots on the road. I mean, that's where we are, and a lot of my municipalities, our municipalities, don't have a say in any of these matters. But the governor's executive order did give us the opportunity to have a say on, and it's my relationship with my parish government, school board, and sheriff that I express my opinion. I'm very ITEP friendly. I'm very friendly of this company as well. But as a representative of local government, I have a couple of questions that I need answered. So these contracts, are they part of, when they got approved, they were sent to local government because it fell under the new rules that the local governments had a voice in, regardless of what their criteria is, did they have a say in if these contracts if they would accept them or not, is my question.
Yes, they were approved the November 2020 meeting by this board, and then it was sent to the locals for their consideration.
And it was under the rules that the local
Yes, it was under
governments
the
had
2018 rules.
And was the local government's approval within a timely manner?
Yes, they returned their notice of action, which gave them 60 days to take action.
Okay, thank you. That's the questions I need.
Thank you, Mayor.
As a representative of local government.
Thank you, Mayor.
It may not be the right time to ask the question, but I wanted to ask, since the executive legal counsel has expressed her opinion as to whether or not that issue is on appeal today. I mean, obviously, they've expressed their opinion that it's subject to the 2010 contract, and although the applications were made after the executive order. So my question is, is it, number one, is it subject to the appeal, or is that a moot issue that it is subject to the order?
All I can do is give you an opinion. The way I read their appeal, I think they're much like many lawyers. They present a case to a judge and try to give him as many pegs as possible to hang his hat on. And I tend to agree with Ms. Porter. I think that the support that is required under the Cooperative Endeavor Agreement, I'm not sure it extends to every contract moving forward, but I don't think that's necessarily dispositive of the overall issue. I think that was one of the pegs that they put there, hang your hat on, but I don't agree that support goes to saying we have to rubber stamp everything that comes across. This board still has authority to up or down anything that comes to us, according to what we think is in the best interest of the state of Louisiana. Any other questions or comments? Anything at all? Any further comments from the public? There is a, yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. I didn't know I'd get a second stab at it, but I am chair of Legal and Legislative Committee on the Orleans Parish School Board. I've been there 2 years. In that entirety, we have been going through this process with Folgers. It has never been brought to my attention that there was ever an alert that the criteria was not, did not reconcile with what you all have. I just heard that the city heard. We never heard. As we move forward, I know y'all about to vote, I don't know what you're going to do, but as we move forward, it'll be really important for all of us to determine what local control means. When the governor gives an executive order like this, what do we or do we not have a say in, it starts to feel like then if it all must be the same as what this group would do, as you all have the ultimate authority, then is the local board then just a check on what you all would do in case you all go awry? And then it starts to get confusing in terms of what are the standards, what is the process, what are we, there's going to have to be better communication, I believe, in terms of how we move forward if we're going to have this addendum to the ITEP, that there's a local say. Because at this point, I'm becoming confused as to what exactly is the local role. If it's not just to mirror what y'all are doing. I hear you saying that maybe they went too far. I wish they had been communicated to us. I feel like it's a bit of a baked cake, then told we don't like cake. I would just like much better communication going forward. I'll be there for at least another 2 years at Orleans Parish School Board. There's hundreds of school board members in the state, and we all try to do our best. We know, like you pointed out, we're all volunteers, trying to do our best in government the right way. And I'd say in Louisiana, we have a really good track record of doing government well, contrary to our reputation. And that is what we absolutely seek to do. And this is just beginning to be like kind of confusing and frustrating in terms of what is expected. I will ask for clarification moving forward.
Well, I think your point's well taken, and I think that I think one message that can be inferred, assuming this motion passes, one message that can be conferred is that from a Board of Commerce and Industry perspective, any municipality, any school board, any local government can have guidelines, but they cannot be more stringent than what's under the ITEP rules. You know, that is the point. There are a lot of things that local government can do to be part of this process. I mean, the example I gave earlier, just provide a place for government to come, for a company to come and say, okay, tell me what your expectations are within the community. Tell me what can we do to be better, to be part of you? Because this is the power. This is the power you have, and this is the thing that I want to be sure that you understand. You have the power to say, we don't want you. We're not willing to give up any tax revenue to get you here. You have the power to say no, which therefore gives you the power to discuss and to say, this is the corporate citizen we want you to be. These are the kind of things we want you to be engaged in. Now, you can't change ITEP rules, but you can change the kind of behavior that they may participate in while they're in your community. I'm sorry. So those are, I think, and again, I'm just one member and one vote, but those are things that I think that local government can do. And I think this is one of the frankly good things that has come out of the executive order process, is that there is now more communication going on between industry and local government than there has been in times past. And I think that's a good result. I know that, and I've heard several local government people, that's what they've said to me, is we're having better communication we've ever had. If nothing else, that's a good thing. But I think the linchpin in this particular situation is the criteria that was greater than the ITEP rules.
And then I would look forward to better communication in terms of what does greater mean, what does more stringent mean, what does maybe getting outside of our lane mean. We have, of course, across the state, many industries that are there that are then making, say, additions, improvements. So it becomes a different question as to whether or not we want you there or not. But what about these new applications, which aren't about being there, but about now that you are there, which is maybe a different question. And so, again, I would look forward to greater conversation, communication about how this is going to work.
Absolutely. But again, we've only had two local governments where we've had this issue.
Well, then again, we need to
We've
have
not
that.
had it with any of the others. So.
But again, but still, that just points out, I would say still, we need that
I don't
communication.
disagree. I don't disagree with you at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Linda Wren, and I'm coming in as a citizen, but I'm involved in Together New Orleans and Together Louisiana, and I'm trying to understand this complex process. I don't have any background in law or city government. One thing that struck me was that the city council was notified that they went above and beyond the guidelines. And I didn't hear, and maybe it did happen, that the school board and the sheriff's office also got that communication. The school board being more, maybe not quite as politically connected. I wonder if they might have known if they would have gone to the city council and said, hey, y'all are screwing this up for us, and we need to do something about this. So if just the city council got that notice, that's concerning when there's other bodies that are involved, like the school board and the sheriff's office.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, but I know that if you go to the city council webpage and you go to the mayor's office and you go to economic development and you look under ITEP process, there are a number of steps that a company has to go through to under the mayor's own description.
Okay.
And it becomes very clear as you read those steps that the school board and the city council and the sheriff, all three, are working on that project together. So I can't tell you for sure whether that was communicated to the school board or not.
Yeah.
But if they're working carefully and closely on all the applications, it stands to reason that at some point it might have been a gee, did you know kind of thing. So
yeah,
I don't know. But when you look at that website and you see how those steps work, it is clear that the three organizations are working together. So
in theory.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
That's what the process is. Whether it works, I don't know.
Yeah. And again, this will show my ignorance, but if this entity in New Orleans overstepped and made guidelines that were more stringent and they were notified, is there not an opportunity for this group here to say, yes, those guidelines were too strict, but we think that Folgers needs to pay what our guidelines are? Or is that no ability to do that? You have to just grant their appeal, or and they pay nothing?
That's a fair question, but the guidelines that New Orleans adopted and the school board adopted went to to Folgers' qualification to get the exemption. Mm-hmm. It was a all or nothing kind of thing. It didn't say you get more of an exemption if you do this, less of an exemption if you do that. So I think that that's the problem. That's where we are on that.
Disappointing.
I understand. Anything else?
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Very quickly, Mr. Roderick, very quickly. We've been here a long time.
I've not heard the board speak to the fact that the city expressly, both in internal communications with the staff and formally in the resolution, established that its guidelines were not used and did not apply to 4 of the 6 exemptions, for which an advance notice had been submitted before the development of those guidelines. It said it had nothing to do with it. It said that internally, it said it formally, and it said it using the same criteria that this board used in the initial rules and executive order. Or the fact that the sheriff, which has no guidelines, period. We've talked to Marlon Gussman, we've talked to the new sheriff, just does not have guidelines, rejected them. They're all, are they being treated as though the guidelines did apply when in those cases they clearly appear not to have applied? So I haven't heard you speak to that and think that that does deserve some consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Sloan made the motion. Your motion was to approve the school board, the city council, and the sheriff? Or was it one or two, or was it some of all? Help explain your motion so we're clear.
My motion was to approve the Folgers Coffee Company contracts that have been listed, based upon all the three approving authorities, and because they band together to create what was here. That's whether they abstained or not, it came out as local government. So that's why my motion is to approve all 6.
Mr. Bishop, you made the second. Do you concur? Okay, yeah, so that's a yes. All right. Any other questions or comments from the public, or comments from the public? Real quick, Mr. Waltzer.
Yes, I think it's inappropriate to...
Get in front of the mic. I'm sorry for the court reporter.
I'm just gonna, I think it would be inappropriate to, I believe that the rule would require that there be some evidence that that a decision was based on the guidelines, and I believe that those that are expressly not based on the guidelines should be excluded from the motion as it's currently drafted, because I think there needs to be some showing of an abuse of discretion, and when the city or the sheriff is saying nothing at all except no, which is, you've said, has the right to say no, simply say no, it would be unfair to attribute the omissions of the New Orleans City Council, for instance, on that body, and for the 4 applications that were expressly done outside of the guidelines. It again would be unfair to apply what is tantamount to a punishment, because they're just saying no. That's what they did for those 4. Thank you. I would urge that those be carved out. The sheriff and the ones submitted in 2017 under the 2017 and 2018 ITEPs numbers.
All right, Mr. Pearson.
In a few moments, I suspect we'll be making an important vote on the issue before us. And I just want to be clear when we do. I'm looking past the word Folgers at this moment and looking at a precedent that the board's going to challenge the voice of the local community. Currently, we just ask for a yes or no, and we use that as the standard against how we proceed. You have local support or you don't. In this case, we see very clearly that the local support is not there. Another question that was raised are these standards that have been put in place reasonable or unreasonable? They're not the standards that we recommend. In fact, we were in the room as advisory and said, this is not the way you're going to build a lot of industry in your future. Now, were they unreasonable standards put in? Basically 4 elements of that. $18 an hour wage related to the Quality Jobs Program. For a manufacturing operation, and these are only applicable to manufacturing operations, that would not appear to be an onerous wage. There were new job requirements that would range by the scale of the proposal. But in some cases, retention and modernization activities are going to cause you to make a good decision to move forward with a project that does not create new jobs, but holds the jobs you have in place. So there is a jobs requirement, and that's more onerous than what we might recommend. They require that this be in an enterprise zone, an opportunity zone, or a census tract with a lower than the average wage. And finally, they don't want to approve any project that's already started. Now, you can submit in advance and begin your project, but you do so at risk that this board and the governor will sign a tax exemption contract for you later. Speed to market is important to companies. So to disqualify those companies that have already broken ground is not one that we would recommend. However, they would consider that, I would think, to be the but for, that I'm in Orleans Parish and I want to start this project and I want your approval to move forward with a tax exemption. But if you've already started, that's off the table. Those are the imposed restrictions that you've heard discussed today as being too high of a bar. From my vantage point, it's a higher bar than I would like, but parish governments and local governments make their own determinations, and these have been carefully considered by Orleans Parish governmental entities. They affect what Mr. Baggert pointed out, which is, how do I tell a company, how do I tell them that they've got a good chance of securing approval? Well, if I have these criteria and I meet these 4 key elements, I'm likely to get that approval. We can't micromanage into 64 parishes. We are guiding, advising, and working with this board to secure those opportunities. But in this case, you surely have to recognize that while these are more onerous than you might want in terms of economic development policy, those are policies that have been selected by those parish governments. So I would just ask that you consider that and the precedent that's being set today on how we proceed with this matter.
Any other comments, questions?
Could I hear the motion again, please?
The motion is to approve the Folger Coffee Company contracts, and I can list them all, but there's 6 numbers that are listed here. Last 4 of 0466, 0467, 0297, 0298, 03, and I think you corrected it, 91? Yes, sir. And the last one being 0392.
I thought that those applications had already previously been approved 2 years ago.
Yes. Essentially what has happened is the local government has denied them, the coming to us for an appeal, which basically, we overrule that denial and send the contracts to the governor for his signature.
So maybe the motion should be sustaining the appeal of Folgers in as much as it was the ordinances of the Orleans Parish Governing Authorities were too onerous and beyond the scope of the rules and regulations of this board.
I hope somebody got that down.
Would you accept that amendment, Mr. Sloan?
Yes, I'll accept it.
Mr. Bishop, would you accept that amendment? Yes, he would. All right, so, very good. Contrary to the belief in the room, I'm going to have to speak against the motion for at least partially. Number one, I don't think that the sheriff's matter is before the board. I don't think it was part of the original appeal. I think the fact is we don't know the basis for which the sheriff made his decision. I think I know, but I don't know. There's nothing that I have that indicates to me that the sheriff based his opinion on any criteria. The city council ordinances, the 4 resolutions approving the city council ordinances did draw some very important distinctions. I don't like the way they were written, but nevertheless, they said what they said. There were 4 applications that preceded the enactment of the criteria. When the ordinance that enacted the criteria was enacted in I had those numbers in my head an hour ago. In any event, 4 of these applications came before the criteria were enacted. To have retroactive application of those ordinance criteria to those applications, I don't think they could have done that. And to the contrary, in the city's ordinances, they specifically said we're not applying the criteria, that we're doing this based only upon the failure to, or the fact that we need the money. The last 2 applications, however, 0391 and 2019 0391 and 2019 0392, each of those specifically say the criteria are in place and we are applying them. And, oh, by the way, we also need the money. So in my world, those last 2 ordinances are clearly based on the criteria. The first 4 are not. So as it stands, I don't think we can second guess the first 4 resolutions, but I think this board absolutely has the basis to second guess the other 2 that I just mentioned. The school board, they simply relied on the criteria completely. So their criteria, their resolution said they don't meet the criteria, therefore you don't get it. So in my world, a better motion would be to approve to grant the appeal as to the school board ordinances, according to the school board millages, to grant the appeal as to 2019-0391 and 2019-0392, but to deny the appeal on the remaining. That to me would be a more appropriate motion. So for that reason, I'll be voting against this one.
Do we need to amend the motion, Mr. Chairman?
Not as far as I'm concerned. It's up to Mr. Sloan and Mr. Bishop. I don't get to pick which motions get amended.
I will remain with my motion.
All right. Any other questions or comments from the board? Any other comments from the public? Hearing none. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Leonard.
Jimmy Leonard, Advantis Consulting. I'll make this quick just to add 2 points. So with the sheriff not having a body in which you can rule, we were unable to identify any formal information from his site. But in going through the Orleans Parish document that is on their website that everybody has to read and follow, and these are the steps, it clearly states in number 8, and this actually, if y'all want to follow me, this is item number 3 in y'all's packet that you have. Step 8 says the sheriff office sends a letter to the BCI with approval or denial based on the ITEP committee recommendation. The ITEP committee recommendation for those 2017 and 2018 applications was to approve, and the sheriff still denied. So it says the process is for him to do that, and so that is the only information that is available on the sheriff. With respect to how the matters were determined, the articles that came out right after the decision that was made, let me get to that. This is going to be number 5. I'm going to get number 4 in your packet, highlighted at the top. I'll read a quote from Council Member Cindy Wynn. Folgers did not do anything wrong, Council Member Cindy Wynn said, adding that she was only voting to reject the applications because the city needs the money and because the applications didn't meet the city's standards, which are stricter than the state's, end quote. Further, as you go down, the 17 and 18 applications which were deemed to be, quote, grandfathered in, as we stated earlier, were applications that were filed after investments were made, which were consistent with how Folgers had been filing all of their ITEP applications to date. Ran afoul with the Orleans Parish requirement to pre-file with them first, and she says None of the 6 applications meet the city's criteria. That was all 16, that was all the 17, 18, and 19, which requires the creation of 15 jobs, with each job paying a minimum of 18. Also, some of the applications were for facilities that Folgers had already built, prompting Council Member Helena Moreno to call the proposed exemptions a gift rather than an economic incentive. So I just wanted to All right, a written statement from Helena Moreno. Thanks to Governor Edwards, a few years ago, we were able to take control of the industrial tax exemption program and authored strong local guidelines to ensure we only grant exemptions if corporations meet job creation and local economic development goals. Folgers has met guidelines in the past, and the council has fairly granted those exemptions, which I am not aware of. They didn't have any of the authority in those early ITEPs. But the Folgers exemptions in question now failed these tests, and the council voted it down. That was dated last week. So just simply wanted to make sure all the information was available prior to y'all's consideration and vote.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote? Okay, there's a motion on the floor to approve the 6 contracts, to approve the appeal and approve the 6 contracts and send them to the governor for his execution. And we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Aye. Okay, let's have a hand vote, please. Oh, wait, let's do a roll call vote, forgive me. That way help the council member.
David Toops. Nay. Yvette Kohler. Nay. Diane McGinnis.
Or.
Stuart Moss. Representative Vincent St. Blanc.
Yes.
Barry Mulligan.
Yes.
Kenneth Havert.
Yes.
Gerald Jones.
No.
Andrew McQueen.
No.
Brett Alon.
Yes.
Representative Stuart Bishop.
Yes.
Secretary Don Pearson.
Nay.
George Nesser.
Nay.
Marshall Simeon. Ronnie Salone.
Yes.
Zach Lamont. Travis Holly.
Nay.
We have 9 nays, 8 yes.
Motion fails by a vote of 9 to 8. All right. Do we have a substitute motion or a new motion on the floor?
Without some help on remembering the numbers, I will move that the 2 that you suggested did meet the requirements.
Do you want me to take a stab at a motion?
Why don't you do it?
I'll take a
That'd be a
stab
lot
at it, but I'm
easier
going to
than
make
me.
it your motion, okay? And you can correct it the way it needs to be. That the appeal of Folgers be approved as to the school board millage for the 6 contracts, that the appeal of Folgers as to the city contracts be approved for 2019-0391 and 2019-0392, and that the appeal of Folgers be approved for the school board contracts for those 6, the school board millage for those 6 contracts.
I will adopt that language as my own.
Thank you. Do we?
Second that
We
motion.
have a second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
To clarify, the sheriff's taxes are then not included
Correct.
in the appeal request?
Correct. The sheriff's taxes and the 4 the four that predated the adoption of the criteria for the city of New Orleans are not included.
So I'd like to submit very brief commentary. The school board, it's our understanding, and no testimony was provided today, that the school board has ever been informed that their standards were out of compliance with the Board of Commerce and Industries. So we think it is unfair to hold them accountable for something about which they were not informed.
Thank you, Mr. Broderick. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Nay. Okay, let's have a roll call vote.
Okay. Mayor David Toops.
Nay.
Yvette Cola. Guy McInnes.
Nay.
Stuart Moss. Representative Vincent St. Blanc. I can hear him.
Yes.
Okay. Barry Mulligan.
Yes.
Smith Havard. Yes. Gerald Jones.
Yes.
Andrew McQuain.
Yes.
Loretta Lon.
Yes.
Representative Stuart Bishop.
Yes.
Secretary Don Pearson.
Nay.
George Nasser.
Yes.
Marcia Simeon. Ronnie Salone.
Yes.
Zach Lemoyne. Travis Holly.
Yes.